What do you believe right now that's making you feel this way? And when you analyse it, you realise how irrational you can be at times.
Every single one of our major customers and minor customers all shut their doors overnight.
It's not sales per se, but the outcome of it is, because people get to know you, they get to see you.
But, you know, what's the culture like at the business? What do we stand for, the values?
I've got to tick that box on my personal development programme I don't really want to be here.
Scaling up a business isn't easy. If it were, we wouldn't have less than 4% of businesses scaling beyond 10 employees or around £1 million turnover level, and less than 1% beyond 50 employees. But the contribution that we make as owner-managers to our economies is immense and should never be underestimated, yet it can be a tough gig for all of us at times, and only other business owners truly understand the challenges that we face. And through ScaleUp Radio, we aim to help make things a little easier. We interview guests who have been where you are now and may have faced some of the challenges that you are facing. And they offer their thoughts and advice on what has worked for them, as well as what didn't. And we've also combined many of the lessons from these interviews, and also through working with hundreds of owner managers over the last 10 years or so, into a practical scale-up handbook that we've called the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System, or ESUS. And it's for owner managers like you and me as we navigate our own scale-up journey. And you can order a copy through your favourite online book retailer, or by going to all the W's, esusgroup.co.uk, www.esusgroup.co.uk. Today on ScaleUp Radio, I interview Dan Maudhub, who set up Wonderful, which is a creative digital agency around about 13 years ago, and over that time he's now grown it to about 18 people, somewhere between £1.5–2 million turnover. So it's a nice strong growth over that time, and lots of lessons along the way, covering all sorts of aspects of building and scaling a business. It's a technology-led creative business, but he's very clear that actually it's really about the human-led digital experience. So it's human first, if you like. So it's not all about the technology, but the technology is very much supporting it. So we spend quite a lot of time actually looking at the people side of the business, and Dan is very strong about that culture. They've recently moved to what he calls a remote first way of working. So they've gone from being primarily office-based to being remote first, but they still link in some office-based things, and they've put in place a number of tactics within the business to make sure that they keep that culture really strong. And I also want you to listen out to Dan's 4-stage recruitment process. He's really nicely defined that stages. They might tweak it a little bit depending on the roles, but he's got a really nice 4-step recruitment process. So really strong growth, but he'd be the first to admit that he hasn't got it all right along the way, and plenty of mistakes. And he talks about some of those key ones and some of the ups and downs that he's had along the way. So it's not all been plain sailing. And one of those things was one of the original founders, or certainly one of the early directors of the business, exiting them from the business as they started to see things differently, and that process around buying them out and how he went about that. They also moved on to developing their own technology not so long ago in response to their clients' demand, and seeing an opportunity there. And some of the questions then about where does that technology fit, and the difficulties of whether are they, or the questions around whether they're a product-led company now or the service-led. Where does that new technology fit within the business? So lots of really good insights here. You can't fail to get some value out of this discussion. So let's go across and listen to Dan and the rest of his story. Welcome to another episode of ScaleUp Radio. Today I'm here with Dan Maudhub, who is the founder and MD of the Wonderful Creative Agency, or otherwise known as Wonderful. So Dan, welcome to ScaleUp Radio.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Oh, brilliant. So tell us all about Wonderful. What's it all about?
Well, the clue's in the name. We started life as a fairly traditional creative agency. We really wanted to sort of empower brands with that creative thinking, that creative edge. As we've gone along the journey, obviously the whole world of digital has become such a key part of every business's ecosystem and life cycle. So we sort of have grown over the years into a digital first creative agency. So very much around creating digital experiences for brands. So, we in the one liner, we'd say fusing creativity and technology to grow brands. That's kind of what we do.
Excellent. And what makes you different from other agencies that might be out there?
Absolutely nothing. No, I'm joking. I think two main things. One is we find that a lot of agencies would major on one side or the other. So, for example, you get a lot of traditional creative agencies or design agencies that would be their lens with which they approach a client project. And actually, we end up partnering with a lot with those agencies because they respect the fact that we've got that creative edge, but we understand technology. Yeah. So I think what makes us different is we really have a fairly in-depth understanding of, CRMs and web platforms and mobile platforms and different coding languages and programs and that sort of stuff. But we bring a creative UX edge into that. So I think that fusion is why we win projects and what we bring to projects is because when you're working with us, you're going to get that creative thinking, you're going to get that design thinking, but that technical application. So that's kind of what our sweet spot is. I think the other thing that makes us different is we're very outcomes focused in the sense of we're not just a consultancy, but we're not just a production house either. We blur the two so that we're generating real business outcomes. So when we're going through like a discovery process or pre-discovery process, we're often asking business questions, not just product questions. Right. So that kind of, we find that a lot of particularly entrepreneurs that are looking to scale themselves, they really appreciate that. We're not just coming in to build a website or a CRM. We're actually coming in to help them realize their scaling plans, obviously from a product perspective.
Great. And from a business model perspective, then how does that affect the way that you make money? Does that change things from being sort of ad hoc projects to more recurring, retained type clients? How do you charge your clients? How do you make money?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think it's and both. So, some clients typically they have a defined brief and, there's a defined sort of project that goes with it. Having said that, everything we create has an ongoing life cycle. So if we're designing and building a new digital product, for example, there's ongoing iterative development, there's analytics, there's ongoing value that we add back into it. But we built our own analytics platform a couple of years ago because we found that clients didn't understand the results they were getting from their digital activity. So we actually built a visualization tool that enabled them to understand it, which then leads into an ongoing relationship with the client. So I'd say probably 60% of our clients come in on a project basis. We'll end up on a level of retainer, but then other clients are looking for a new retained agency, and we prefer that retained relationship, not just from a cash flow perspective, although that is handy, obviously, but from the perspective of we're held to account for adding value month in, quarterly in, annual, so, we enjoy that. That's where we're kind of, you move from being a supplier to being more of a partner, which is what you always want.
Excellent. Good. Well, we'll definitely explore that analytics platform in a minute. Definitely come back to that. So you're based in Maidstone, I think. Is that right?
Correct. Well, we are, but actually we've moved to a remote first environment in the last 3 months. So there's been a big shift, from brought by COVID, which obviously every agency's gone through, but actually it's more of a cultural shift for us as well, which again we can unpack at some point. But it's so we were based in Maidstone, but our staff are kind of all over Kent, London. We've got staff members in South Korea, 2 in India, Isle of Wight, basically global.
Yeah, and how many people have you got? Can you give us an idea of the size of the business?
In sort of full time in-house, we're only 18 of us, and then we have a kind of wider production base as well that will bring in for particular projects.
So you got 18 kind of in-house people that would be essentially that sort of full-time team. Is that
correct? Yeah.
Great. So I was going to ask you. Being in Maidstone, whether you're a man of Kent or a Kentish man, but maybe that's not so appropriate if it's all remote now.
No, but that's a very good question. And what is, mate, it depends which side of the river you are, doesn't it?
It does, which side of the river.
Yeah.
I think the east side is a Kentish man and the west side is a man of Kent. But
that's right. And do you know what? I think Maidstone is right in the middle. But I think I think we're a Kentish man. I think we just go onto the east side, I think. But it's a good question. So you obviously, you know Kent? You know?
Yeah, I was born just outside of Maidstone, actually.
Were you really?
Yeah, a little place called Teeson. But I did most of my adult schooling anyway, or not adult schooling, but older schooling was in Cranbrook.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Kent.
Yeah. No, I know Teeston very well, and Cranbrook.
So we've just alienated most of our audience then who don't come from Kent, but it was a good. I enjoyed that bit. They're good. So you've got about 18 people. You're sort of more technology focused than many other agencies, so that's helping to drive the business. Does that give you a challenge from recruiting people?
Yes, it does, because we call our in-house team the real sort of architects of every project. So the standard and quality of what we would do is, we'd like to think, quite high. So it does, from the perspective of, particularly pre-COVID and then going through that COVID scenario with the great migration and resignation, all of that stuff, people moving, trying to find quality of people in terms of their skills, but also culture has been a challenge. And it's something we've worked really, really hard at doing. So not just finding people with the right skills, but people that really want to genuinely work collaboratively in a remote environment, people that really want to see outside of their daily roles, because you're a developer, right? And you've got these designers telling you stuff, and you've got project managers telling you stuff, and intrinsically developers don't like that. It's a generalization, but I've worked with a lot over the years. And so we really have to develop a culture where we're collaborative by nature, where we do work as teams, we work in pods. We have that side of things. And also being remote first does mean that there's a lot more daily scrums. We have down tools time. We have a 1 day together a month in office working policy. We have quarterly away days. So culturally, you've really got to buy into that kind of culture. So we say remote first rather than remote staff. So it means their first point of work is remote, but actually there is a rhythm that we have as an agency of being together in the room. So you kind of got to buy into that culture.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has been a challenge, but we've got a great team, thankfully, right now.
And how do you mentioned a lot of things you do there about how you keep that culture going. How do you assess people now that it's remotely? Are you remote first? Are you interviewing them remotely as well? And how are you therefore trying to really find out whether they're going to fit into your team?
We have quite a specific recruitment process. I mean, it depends on the nature of the role, but it's a 4-stage process. And again, without going into all the nuances and details of it, it's very much designed to really assess culture and chemistry as much as it is capability. So we have kind of 4 C's that we use as a kind of framework for recruitment, which I've just said. And then it's really about kind of ensuring how they're going to fit with the team. So, for example, even like with like an account manager we recruited in the last year, for example, we did like a personality test with them just to see how they fit in with the team, and we shared the other team members' personality tests with them, just to kind of make sure there's that real relational dynamic and connection, particularly in a remote first environment. One of the observations coming through the pandemic period was that it's very hard to recruit just purely remote first, because there's much less loyalty, there's much less relational equity, there's much less connection points between the recruiter and the people being recruited. So we do work really hard at the relationship side of things, and work really hard at developing a culture that's almost not remote first. It's almost like, doesn't matter if you're looking at someone through a screen or in the office, you should feel the same culture.
Okay, great. And are you able to take us through those 4 stages? I think that might be quite interesting for people as to what you're trying to achieve with each of those 4 stages.
Yeah, so it depends on the nature of the role. So if we're looking at a design or development production role, for example, the first stage would be, in the fish, you call it a screening interview. Then that would be very much, to be honest, that's very much about chemistry. Yeah. So that's a 20-minute telephone or video interview with one of the team, and that's really about chemistry, because chemistry really can define culture more than almost anything else, as well as character. So the first interview is really a chemistry interview. Are they going to be a right fit for a small agency like us? Do they like us? Do we like them? We're very transparent. We're very open about culture, how we work, what the expectations would be, just to see if they buy into it. We have had, potential candidates kind of go, sounds good, but I've been offered a, more corporate agency job where it's all a bit, I can, hide behind a corporate firewall, and so we're fine. That's great, because we're very agile, very fast paced. And that doesn't suit everyone. So we have to be really honest with the candidate up front. So first interview is chemistry, and then we do a capability interview. So that would be around, looking at capability. So looking at things like their CV. There could be a code test involved. There could be, depends on the nature of the role, obviously, or it could be, looking at their portfolio, whatever it might be. That's the second interview. The third interview will be with the management team. So that will be the leadership team, myself, my creative director primarily. So we'll get involved at the third interview stage. And then there we're really looking at character. That's one of the real key things there. And that's one of the hardest things, I think, to get in an interview. If any of your listeners have got any great insight into how do you assess character in an interview process, bearing in mind there are, there are things you are and aren't allowed to talk about in an interview, the questions you are allowed to ask and aren't allowed to ask. So you can't really dig too deeply in one sense. But for us, character is super important, right? When you've got clients in one ear and deadlines in another ear, and, you've got to work as a team. It's where your character piece comes in. So that's the third interview stage. And the final interview depends on the nature of the role, but often it's just with myself. And that is a combination of everything. And to be perfectly frank with you, whether I should say this on a podcast or not, the final interview is often to work out if what they've been saying in the previous interviews is true or not.
Yeah.
I've been burnt so many times. And for us, our employees they're the lifeblood of the business. And we genuinely try, it sounds a little bit twee, but we genuinely try and have that, relational, community-based approach to, to employment. Because we've got to spend all day together, and so we do try and, we do really try and dig as deep as we can and make sure they're happy with the role as well. Yeah. We brought a new developer recently, and, there was, I'd say the third and fourth interview were much more around about life outside of work because of their particular, framework of life at the moment. It was all about that. And it was really sometimes almost a two-way process. Like, are we going to be the right fit for them? Because, it's a two-way thing, right? I think that whole employer-employee mindset is kind of shifted a little bit where it's got to work for both parties.
Absolutely. It's almost gone completely 180, hasn't it? It's around the other way instead of, you really used to be a case of whether you should be grateful that I'm offering you a job.
Right.
Not like that at all, is it now?
Right.
So, yeah, good. So 4 stages. Thank you for outlining those. So sort of chemistry, capability, character, and then your sort of final check, really, a combination of them all.
Right.
On the character side, I know you were putting it out there and saying anybody that's got some great ideas, but how do you assess the character? What sort of things are you looking for in that particular stage?
I think, characters, a combination, I think, of your makeup, of how you're made, how you resonate, how you think, how you respond to pressure situations. So it depends on the nature of the role and the candidate again. But we've done, as I mentioned before, we've done things like personality tests in the past. In fact, we've done that several times where you're trying to find out how they think and how they respond, because particularly for sort of client-facing roles, at the end of the day, they're going to be dealing with different types of clients, and they're going to bring different strengths and different weaknesses to it because we're all made differently. So, sometimes it's around their personality and their mindset, and other times it's around trying to understand how they work in real world environments. A lot of the first 2 interviews are quite static, but we try and make the third interview quite dynamic. So how do you respond to real world situations? How do you, so again, depends on the nature of the role, but we've done things like presentations in the third interview, so where we can see how they would naturally communicate, where their energies go, where their kind of content mind goes, things like that. So we're trying to really be able to sort of find out, can you get into the war, into the trenches together, and what does that kind of look like? So because agency life feels like it's in the trenches most of the time. So maybe it's just me. So yeah, I think it's that side of things. It's not trying to find anyone out. It's trying to find out how they're made and what their makeup's like and how they resonate and reason through things.
Yeah. And you mentioned you've been burnt a couple of times. How do you check in that final interview that that what they've said they're about is true?
So before we get to the final interview, we'll have done the references.
Okay.
So we'll cross-reference the references with their experience and how they see things. It will be a case of, reviewing some of the questions that we've asked in the previous interviews or some of the things we've seen. We might talk about again, or we might, if there's a shortlisted, if we get down to, the final interview and there's a shortlist of 2 candidates, often you're dealing with nuances, or we've got a lot of this is sort of we have a quant methodology as well, so we actually have scoring sheets and things like that as well. Okay. I should have said that. So there is objectivity in it as well. So in the 3rd interview, I believe, we have each of the people in the interview have a scoring sheet, and then we then cross-reference the scoring sheets afterwards. So because otherwise, I might say one thing, but my creative director sees a completely different thing. Yeah. Why is that? Why did we score high, low in those areas? So there is an element of sort of analysis within it as well, if that makes sense. But the final interview really is cross-checking all of those different pieces. If there are 2 or 3 candidates shortlisted, then it's why is candidate A going to get the job over candidate B? Not in a direct way, but again, in a small business, you just have to kind of know if they're the right fit. One might be a slightly better fit than the other for very nuanced reasons or for very obvious reasons. Yeah. But sometimes you don't know that until you get to the final stage, if that makes sense. Yeah, it does. And I thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to just drill down a little bit into that, because I know it's such a tough thing for all of us as small business owners in terms of recruiting. And you've clearly thought that through, and you've got yourself a process. Yes, it might be tweaked according to the particular role, but you've basically got those 4 stages and what you're looking for, which I think is really helpful. What have you found works for you from actually finding candidates in the first place? What sort of tools and things work for you to find people? Oh, that's a minefield, isn't it? Again, without going into too much detail, because I do realise I talk a lot. I think all the usual channels are obviously, the LinkedIn and obviously recruiters and the obvious channels. But I think as well, referrals have been super helpful. Right. So, we do have a referral scheme in place for staff. It's in the staff handbook. It's part of our culture. And networks and networking as well. So we will, we fairly regularly will get someone to say, oh, I've got a great account manager looking for a new role. Hey, Dan, thought of you guys. Now, we might not be recruiting for an account manager right now, for argument's sake, but we'll keep their details on file. And when we are, we know they've already been referred in. They're a friend of a friend. So I think our network, and being open, so staff members, that have gone to other agencies, they might email me a year. I've had this a few times. Email me a year later and go, "Hey, we've got this great designer that's actually moving on. Do you want to talk to them?" Yeah. So I think it's that network, and that reciprocal relationship building. Good. Is always probably the best way, I think.
And it sounds like, from what you said, you're always on the lookout, and you're keeping that kind of people bank idea, that reserves bench almost.
Definitely.
Going forward. Good. And how have you you mentioned a couple of times, you got your 18 people, and you got obviously got a director, because you talk about creative directors. Well, how have you structured the business from the people aspect, from the org chart, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, we're very flat structure, which has got positives and weaknesses. So we have a head of UX and tech who effectively, in a kind of way, oversees 2 teams, but he largely oversees the tech development team. Yeah. And my creative director then works with him on overseeing the creative process within a project. So our major kind of production team is built around design, strategy, and development, and they're overseen by 2 people, as I've just mentioned. Then we have a sort of a wider strategy team. So, for example, if we're doing some digital brand strategy, we bring in quite a lot of experts, and I will work with them on a strategic piece into a client relationship. Then we have 3 account managers that at the moment directly report into myself and my creative director. We're actually bringing in a client services director at the moment. So
Okay.
if anyone's listening to this,
So that's right. So good client service director, and they know the 4 stages
shameless
they're going to
plug.
go through as well on the interview now. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. So I think we one of our challenges at the moment is building that middle management layer as we scale to the next stage of growth.
Yeah, and that was part of the reason for me asking, because that's we all have to do that if we're going to go through that transition from where essentially you can control everything to where you now need a senior leadership team in place that is doing it. And that transition is a difficult transition to make. And you're well on the way there with 18 people. You're pretty much there. Plug a couple of gaps and you've probably got your senior leadership team by the sounds of it.
That's right. And I think what we've been trying to do over particularly last sort of 3-4 years is really empower each of so we changed our processes so that actually a lot of our production team are self-managing their time, they're collaborating online much more efficiently. So trying to actually remove layers of management is not necessarily needed, particularly the remote first environment. So you have to really work the processes, but actually in terms of we do need to go to the next stage now. So that is an active part of what we're looking at.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, take me back to when you started the business. When was that? How long ago was that?
2010.
So what's that? 13 years or so, and we're up to that sort of 18 people. What are you doing? Somewhere 1.5-2 million turnover, something like that in that sort of band.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Good going. So what got you into it in the first place? What made you start up Wonderful?
Well, actually, it was. I was running the consultancy beforehand, so I was working with brands and helping to consult on brand strategy and digital strategy and that sort of thing. And as the nature of a lot of consultancies, you end up then, can you do that? Can you deliver that? Can you do that? And so it was part by sort of client demand, and secondly by the fact I'd met a really good creative director who had finished, his time has served his sentence in London working for the big network agencies, and he'd got some great credentials behind him, and he just wanted to kind of almost just take a step off the foot off the gas a bit, but also deliver some great creative work. So I brought him in as a sort of co-founder. And then, we set up Wonderful on those two premises. One is we could deliver great creative, with a big brand background, and we could bring that into smaller businesses. And two, we understood digital and technology in a fairly good way. So prior to the consultancy I mentioned, I was the head of sales for a web development company, working with corporate brands and sort of building up websites before there were CMSs. Everything was hard coded. Everything was, really sort of long code development and all that sort of stuff. So I've kind of been in the web development and the tech world since the early noughties.
Brilliant.
I'm aging myself now.
No way, you haven't got anywhere near as much grey in your beard as I have. So how did you decide on the share structure at the very beginning with the two of you then?
Yeah, well, actually, there was 3 of us because my consultancy I co-owned with my then business partner, and then we brought on the creative director. So my then business partner became a silent shareholder, effectively, and then I bought my credit. So we kind of had a fairly even split to begin with, but based on what we were bringing in terms of clients, what we were bringing in terms of value to the business. But then we tried to then bring in a bit more of a performance-based structure. So we kept it quite loose for the first 2-3 years. Now, the major bit of news there came out is that my then creative director didn't really want to adopt the digital piece as much as was needed.
Right.
Because, I said he'd done, many years in, building brands, but primarily offline. So primarily, face-to-face loyalty, offline loyalty schemes. And so most of the briefs we were getting were at the very least web briefs, but were becoming more and more digital, becoming more around SEO, more around content, more around social engagement, social growth, so on and so forth. So actually, I ended up buying him out after 4 years.
Okay.
So the share structure then completely changed.
So looking back on that, what have you learned? What would you recommend to other people?
Be really, really, number one, careful, and number two, clear about the structure you set up with co-founders. It's very easy to kind of, we're in it together, 50-50, we're all mates and it's all going to be great. But to be really honest with you, it wasn't a great process, because you're dealing with people's livelihoods, and then you've got a relational element to it. So I thought we were in this together, and then, you've got one that wants to push it in one direction, another wants to push in a different direction, but you co-own the same amount of shares. So who's got the final voting rights, so on and so forth. So obviously, there's lots of different share options and availabilities out there, but I just didn't know that. When I set up, I didn't realize, growth shares, or, you could have different share classes, A shares, B shares. That wasn't part of our discussion. It was quite a naive, open process. So I think if I was starting again, I would very much have a different discussion around shares.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. And without wishing to pry into too many details, but when you came to that decision, you were going to buy out that creative director, what sort of things did how did you come to an agreement as to what that would look like?
Third party advice, you've got to bring an objective third party into it, otherwise you always end up with your own kind of, imbalanced opinion of what's right and what's not right. But I think, yes, a third party advice, he sought advice, I sought advice, we came up with a figure. And, we just worked it out, and I think, it wasn't an easy process, but I think it was done the right way, so still trying to maintain that element of relational equity between you, I think is always the best way to try and do things. Yeah, I think, I think third party advice is absolutely vital.
And were you able to fund that from the cash flows within the business, or how did you have to take on more debt to take on debt to do that, or how did you fund that?
It was a few years ago now. I'm just trying to remember. We through the cash flow in the business and through personal investment as well.
Yeah, good. And then of course you needed to replace him. I guess you needed to find another creative director then.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, and we did. So I mean, actually, in the interim period, we really doubled down on our technical and digital knowledge. Yeah. So we were doing a lot of work with with brands, particularly around the social and digital space. I mean, market demand, sort of 2013, 14, 15, 16, everything was social growth, everything was. So we actually kind of focused on that, which enabled our creative output to be slightly different. It was much more tactical content, social content. So with a great design team, we were the design partner for several quite large, e-commerce kind of brands. So you're designing banners and page takeovers and landing pages and all that sort of stuff. So we ended up doing a bucket load of that for like 3, 4, 5 years, probably 3, 4 years. And then, again, another long story short, a friend of mine was running a branding agency or a brand strategy agency. And he came up to me and he said, look, I'm great at the creative thinking. I'm great at the brand strategy bit. I'm great at sort of tying teams together, but I don't want to run an agency, And so long story short, is we kind of effectively bought him out, and he came on board as creative director and a shareholder in Wonderful.
Right. So he was running his own business, but wanted to come into your fold, essentially.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And we were working together on a couple of projects. Excuse me. So he could see how we worked. You could see how we he could see where the value was. So yeah, he came on board. That was a fairly seamless process because both parties were motivated to come up with the right deal, to make it work, so on and so forth. So yeah, that was in back in the 2017, 2018.
Great. And what sort of size were you then in terms of your team compared with what you are now?
That's a good question. Around 12 staff.
Okay, so yeah, so slightly accelerated growth so fairly linear growth from there and
yeah, with the bumpy COVID years.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So did that new creative director, did he come with part of the deal that he had some equity in your company then? On Wonderful Go.
Correct.
So he's got a skin in the game as well. Yeah, excellent, good. So clearly there's a couple of milestones there. What are some of the other key sort of stepping stones, would you say along the 13 years or so that you've been running the business?
Yeah, I think there's been a couple. I mean, we're at one now. We're at a slight inflection point now, where because we have majored on the technology side of what we do. So CRM development, CRM integration, app development, the UX side, that sort of thing. We actually, from a brand positioning perspective, and even the kind of part of our proposition, we've kind of lost our way a little bit from that creative edge. So we've been going through a rebranding process, but like a proper top-down sort of, more of a 360, really looking at services, solutions, capabilities, where we really add value, because the agency space is so, it's so kind of saturated in one level, but another level, it's confusing for clients. Particularly now with the generative AI being the hot topic of the month, and everyone's jumping on that now. So do you need creative anymore? So actually, we kind of we're going through a real inflection point at the moment where we're sort of saying, well, what is it? What's our core value add back into that client? So human first digital experiences is really where we add value. So we understand how to create digital experiences for customers, but we also understand a human-first approach, a UX-led approach, that data-led approach. So how are people actually connecting with the products and the strategies that are being developed? So that's kind of where we kind of land with that, and also being able to really help brands to know. It's amazing. I still think that so many brands struggle to know how to really engage audiences over digital. They think it's all to do with the platform. Yeah, we've got this new platform, this new bit of tech, but the customer doesn't really care. Unless it's really adding value to their experience and the data can back it up, you can spend as much as you like, as much technology as you like, it won't move the dial. Yeah. So for us, that's a real kind of, real passion of ours. So now is a real reflection, inflection point. A few years ago, as I mentioned earlier on, a few years ago, 2020, actually just as we went into the pandemic, one of the problems we realized with clients, going back to a comment I've just made, is that they didn't really understand data. Sometimes, from a linear, even Google Analytics, it was like, lots of marketers weren't very well trained in the area. But one of the other problems is understanding data in context. So understanding how your CRM data is really working with your website data, is working with social media data. So we built an API that effectively brought in data from different channels, all the above mentioned channels and others, but we could actually then build custom graphs and charts that would bring together any data source that we wanted to measure, so we could really give our clients a very, very granular view, as well as a bird's eye view, as well, on the different data sources, but also the different metrics that we're trying to measure. So when we look at engagement as a metric, as an example, there's the obvious engagement stats, but how has your social engagement impacted your website engagement? So we're getting great engagement on social, we're getting higher traffic to the website, but we're getting a much lower engagement piece there. So what's the relationship there? What's the strategy that needs to come out of that? So helping clients to see data in context has been something we've tried to do over the last few years. So that became quite a big driver in the agency. So it's not just designing and building products or even just giving top line strategies. We're really using data to inform that strategic piece, and then the tactical delivery from it. Yeah. But yes, we built our own platform called Omni BI in 2020.
Omni BI, and that's you must have looked at the time of things like Hotjar and whatever. So you sounds like you're taking it a step further than Hotjar. Is that correct?
Correct. And things like Data Studio, for example, Data Studio aggregates data really well. Again, part of the challenge we see there is that if you're a brand marketer or at board level, you just want to see 3 graphs and 3 charts where I can see the numbers, I can see what's happening, and I can align them against performance objectives. There wasn't anything out there that did it, so we created it. So within each graph or each chart, for example, you can set targets. So you can sort of set a target for the next 6 months. You want to see a growth of 10% a month for 6 months. You can set that as a target. Then you can measure the data against that target. So it actually becomes a kind of real collaborative tool for clients internally. And then one of the final things we did was build a chatbot into each graph and chart so that clients could talk to each other, but also we could talk to clients. So rather than the kind of standard end of month agency report where you pulled out all this data from, and you copied and pasted it into a PowerPoint or Google Slides.
Yeah.
All of our reporting was done in the system itself, and it was aligned to very specific data sets.
So it was live, and people could essentially ask questions about it as it went along, really. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
Sounds really good. So is that something that you keep to your clients, or is that something that you kind of license out separately?
Yeah, I mean, a good question. And we both, primarily it's for clients. One of the challenges when you start developing a product is, do you become a product-led agency?
Yeah.
Is the product the Trojan horse into a client relationship, or do you build it around it? Is it just, as you said, is it just for your clients and it's your secret sauce, or is it something that should be made openly available so you can onboard more clients from other agencies? So the business planning around it becomes a whole thing in itself. So we've kind of tested product market fit around several of those options.
Okay.
And where we kind of land generally is that it's a client tool, it's a client relationship and client management tool, because ultimately clients probably aren't as obsessed about the data as we are. They kind of just want to see it and want to know what to do, and they want you to do it. So it's not as sticky as we might have wanted it to be at the beginning, although it is extremely valuable because it does give us a real piece of objectivity into our client relationship. Other agencies do ask about it fairly regularly, but then, thank you very much, other agencies, but sometimes you end up having to educate them more than educating the client. So what does this thing do here? And what do we do here? And you end up with two clients. You end up with the agency and the client, and you're only invoicing one of them. So we kind of fairly careful about our agency partners. We do have some agency partners that we work with, but we wouldn't put it out as a third-party tool.
Yeah.
We've had the opportunity for investment to scale it and to turn it into a proper product. We haven't done that because the team's not big enough at the moment to do that. So we're trying to, sounds a bit weird, but almost trying to not limit the growth, but trying to grow systematically rather than taking a couple $100,000 investment, build out a new product. I tried it to be, as in we had the opportunity, but the team weren't ready to adopt it.
Yeah. And that must have been quite a significant investment for you to do that internally. Even if you did most of the developing with your own team, that's a significant on cost or of using your own time and people to do that. So what take us through some of your thinking around that, because it must have been quite a big decision at the time.
Yeah, it was, and it was there was an evolution of an idea I'd had back in 2015, which I won't bore you with now, but I'd seeded the idea with the team for sort of 3-4 years before anything materialized. And actually what ended up happening was sort of client demand. So it was like, we need to understand data. We don't understand data. So I'm telling the team to help them to understand data. So it kind of became a client-driven process, which I suppose is often the best way of developing a product, because you've got an audience, you've actually got someone who wants it, rather than just a kind of brainchild that I had a few years prior, although it was a good idea. So it was, and that's part of the challenge of having a product in a service-driven company. Client billings always take priority. There's never enough time to develop it. So we did build a small external resource team that could work with us. So we do have we have a couple of really good freelance developers that when we need to build out a sort of tactical piece of functionality, they can work on it with us. So it's got its own development environment, it's got its own team, its own server environment, so on and so forth. So
because one of the challenges around that is when you're trying to get your own team to do it on top of whatever else they're doing with clients, there's never enough time. The client always comes first, and so you've carved that off a little bit, which is great. One of the other
we have, but it doesn't move nowhere near as quickly as I want it to.
Yeah, and one of the other questions that comes up quite a lot with things like that is when you've got a client that is driving that request for that extra bit of functionality, it's do I charge the client for it, or do I try and charge the client for it? And then do I just have it for them, or do I do it in a way that we can do to other clients, or do we just suck it up ourselves and do it and then give it to the client? What route did you take?
We tried, probably all of those routes in terms of monetization.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it does depend. So, I mean, for example, it does sit as its own website with its own pricing structure and its own pricing model as well. Because actually, sometimes that's what clients want. They want to know what they're buying for you, what they get for it. If I'm paying you $3,000 a month or $5,000 a month or $1,000 a month, what am I getting for it? So, it does sit within its own kind of offering. But also from a if we're designing and building a digital product or we're working with a client ongoing, it becomes part of that process. So it can be and both. But the idea there, whichever way we do it, is data becomes the objective part of your relationship. We need to change the design on this web page because the data has told us over the last 3 months this is the performance of this page. Yeah. So it does really become an objective part of our relationship with the client.
Brilliant. Good. So if we take the last 13 years or so, what sort of things do you think you got right? What are you proud of that you think, we did that well, we got that right?
Good question. I can tell you what we've done wrong. That's probably what's going to come next.
That was going to be my second question, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, how long have we got? What we got right, I think we've responding to market demand, we've got right. So we've always tried to service the client with what's going to really help them at that time. There is a flip side to that coin, because it does mean sometimes your services and solutions can be not opaque, but they can change quite a lot. So I mentioned earlier on, we had 3-4 years where we were designing a lot of digital campaigns, a lot of social media campaigns, because that was market demand. Whereas now we do relatively little of that because market demand has moved on. So responding to market demand, I think we've got right, to a certain extent. I think building a core culture and value set in the agency is something we've been quite passionate about, whether we got it right or not. Our last staff satisfaction survey, I think averaged, it was 8 point something out of 10, 8.8 or something out of 10. Yeah. So, we've got more to get right, but it's not 4 out of 10. Not that I'd expect it to be. So, for example, like we're B Corp pending. Okay. So waiting for our final interview date with B Corp, because that really aligns with our values, our process, our culture. So I think we're getting that right. I don't know if you ever get it fully right, but we're getting that right. Mm-hmm. Doing the Omni BI was something we got right. That was needed. It moved the agency on, moved our thinking on. It's nowhere near where it needs to be, but it's there. It's serving a purpose. It's moved things on. So I think there's certain things along the way that we've got right at specific times, but I wouldn't say we've got it all right all at the same time and everything's been perfect.
Doesn't exist, does it?
I don't think so. Not in my world.
and so then you did predict my question. So what about what would you do differently with a bit of hindsight?
Oh gosh, honestly, I could really talk for an hour about that. I think just try and summarize that. Recruiting, as much as I've given you I think we've got recruiting wrong more than we've got it right. Right. So, the adages you'll see on LinkedIn every day, the posts about, hire people better than you and find the best staff and get all of that stuff is true, but getting that right is quite hard. So we've got it wrong more than we've got it right. And that's had detrimental impact on internal relationships, client relationships, so on and so forth. So I think recruiting is something we've really worked, we've got better at. We've definitely got it wrong, as much as we've got it right. I think staying true to who we are, staying true to really what you're good at. So being led by market demand is positive because you're moving relationships with clients on, you're moving commercials on, but sometimes you move too far away from where you really add value and you're just selling and doing stuff because clients want it, Yeah. So I think, we're having to readjust that. Cash flow and finances, sometimes giving clients too long to pay the bills. That's really harmed the agency over the years. Our level of bad debt at certain years has been far too high because of that. So I think, getting the cash flow invoice reconciliation process right because cash is king, right? It's a life flow of any business. So, lifeblood of any business. So, yeah, I think we've got that wrong over the years.
So
being too lenient, or letting 4 or 5 invoices slip rather than just one invoice slip.
Yeah.
That sort of process, we've definitely got that wrong. Last thing I'll say, because honestly I could talk about this for ages, is we've both got this right and wrong. But the external advice you bring into an agency,
Okay.
it's very easy for an external consultant to come in, as it would be with us with a client, and kind of move the ship fairly radically, fairly quickly. You're doing this wrong, you should be doing this. And so you end up chasing something, and you kind of get 6 months down the line and go, what was that all about? Why were we chasing that? That hasn't moved any key metric of the agency at all.
Right.
It's just got a lot of people busy and a lot of people, kind of frustrated. So we've brought in some really good consultants, and we've brought in some consultants that we shouldn't have brought in, not because of their quality or expertise, but because they weren't the right fit for us at the time.
Yeah.
So I would sort of say to myself, younger version of myself, be really careful what voices you listen to, externally and internally.
Great, thank you. That is also another one of my questions in a minute. Is what advice would you give your younger self? So we've got that one out of the way already.
Done.
Be careful what voices you listen to.
No, probably, my number, don't start an agency. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, good. No, thank you for sharing that. That's really, really good. So, what's the legacy you want to leave with Wonderful? What's it all about? Why are you, what do you want to leave behind you?
Yeah, great question. And I think part of the answer to that is wrapped up in the B Corp process. So, making an absolute bona fide positive contribution to people, planet, profit. Yeah. And to kind of give you a bit more detail around that, we established our own charitable foundation in 2017, so we put a portion of our profits into the Wonderful Foundation, where we then support community projects in the UK and around the world. So we support them not only financially, but also in helping to give them sort of skills, resource and capability to know how to sort of grow. So to give you a couple of examples, we worked with a mum's mentoring service, that works with single mums, and they wanted to scale out their service. They just got some government grants, but they didn't know how to scale it out, because it worked in one location and they were scaling to several locations. So we helped them with their kind of online marketing plan. We redesigned and built their website. We gave them a technology grant. We helped them with their comm strategy, and now they've scaled it to a national service. So, we were able to really help them with that, both financially, but also utilize our time and our skills to help them do that as well. An example of a project we're working on abroad at the moment, we're working with a bunch of community leaders and sort of pastors, church pastors in Sri Lanka, and we've invested in 1 acre of land per community group, and the seeds to grow rice fields, to grow rice in their fields, for 10 different organisations, with 10 different sort of plots of land with different leaders, and we're seeing if we can set up a sustainable business for them in the local community. So we've been working with another foundation doing that. So yeah, we're quite passionate about how we use our profits and how we use our skill. So I think for us, legacy looks like we've not just grown our organisation and our team, but we've helped others to grow too. Great.
No, I love it. And I imagine that all of your team get to hear about that and get to feel that they're part of doing some of those good things as well.
Yeah, definitely. And there's loads of ways in which they get involved. So currently something that's going live actually in the next couple of weeks is we're doing a virtual 3 Peaks challenge. So again, aligning with our B Corp, side of things, rather than getting everyone to travel all up and down the country to reduce our carbon footprint, we are doing it virtually. So effectively, people are going to be walking the equivalent of 3 Peaks, but rather than 24 hours, they're going to do it in 8 hours, and they're going to do it in their locality. So as well, we can take pictures of different people, where they live and their local environment, so on and so forth as well. So yeah, we've got a virtual 3 Peaks challenge coming up this summer. So the team are all involved in that. They're doing the setup, the marketing, the communication, the fundraising. So that's a whole company-wide thing.
Good. So when's enough with Wonderful? Come back to the core business. You're 18 people now. What's your goal? Where do you want to get it to?
Do you know what? I'm going to say something which might sound a little bit naive, but I'm not set a goal.
Right.
Simply because we have financial targets. Let me just caveat that. So we have financial targets, we have growth goals, we have team targets. So we know what we want the next 12, 24, 36 months to look like. But we've not necessarily set an end goal to that because sometimes that has not happened. We've done that before, and when you haven't achieved it, you get that setback and all of that stuff. And B, we're exploring different options. So there's M&A options, there's exit options, there's so we are looking at all of those options at the moment. So we only want to do things that align with our values and our mission and our vision. Is the goal. Our goal is actually to make it is bigger impact and not bigger size.
Brilliant. Good. Thank you very much for that. And I think we're coming towards the end now. Are you up for a couple of quick fire sort of questions?
Yeah, go for it.
The first one is advice to younger self, which we said is be careful to the voices you listen to, unless there's anything else you'd add to that.
No, that's a pretty good one.
Books or podcasts or other resources that you'd recommend that made a difference to you that you'd recommend to others?
I like listening to the two Bobs. So David C. Baker and Blair Enns. I think they've got some really good stuff around how to really stay in your lane, how to be the expert advisory rather than trying to be generalist and jack of all trades. They're really strong at that side of things. Yeah. So they've got a podcast called The Two Bobs, and they've got a whole bunch of books, and Win Without Pitching. A lot of agency people have heard about that. Right. So I think they're great. Lucy Mann's Gunpowder Consulting Small Spark Theory podcast is really good for practical bite-size, things around agency life. That's a really good podcast as well.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you. What apps or bits of technology? I mean, obviously we've got Omni BI, but from what do you have on your phone? What do you use in the business a lot?
I mean, aside from the standard agency stuff, the project management systems, Slack, HubSpot and all that great and good stuff. We're looking at obviously generative AI at the moment. We're looking at a number of different options. Obviously, the world's gone ChatGPT crazy. Yeah. We have implemented some ChatGPT stuff into some of our processes, which I won't go into details now. But we are looking at the role of generative AI and voice search and voice AI into our core solutions. Okay. At the moment. So that's quite a big piece we're actually going to look at over the next 6 months because, again, going back to the point I made earlier, we know market demand is going there. We know we need to stay in our lane in terms of how and what we deliver within that, but we also do recognize we'll probably need partners that can speak more directly into that space on behalf of clients. So, Brilliant. Yeah, that's the kind of major space we're in at the moment.
Thank you. Excellent. Who do you look up to? Who's had the most influence on you?
I think, my personal faith is quite important. It's very important to me. Right. So I think that kind of, I have a kind of quite a clear set of beliefs about life and faith in myself. So I look up to people that kind of, I really see a line with who they really are. Whether they share my faith or not is kind of irrelevant, but people that really stick to their values and their beliefs and who they are, I really respect those people, whatever they might be, whether I agree or disagree, doesn't really matter. It's people like that. So, even people, I look at people like Richard Branson, who stuck to his values and what he believes and the challenge he wants to make in an industry. I respect that, whether you respect the way they do it or whatever, that's completely irrelevant in my opinion. It's right. Our people being their authentic self. So there's, people that I see really sort of living that authentic sort of lifestyle, people that I respect.
Brilliant. Good. And finally, what's your most successful marketing or lead generation tactic for getting new clients for you?
I think for me personally, my successful tactic is more of a strategy, which is around building network.
Okay.
So, people that know us, like us, trust us, will refer us.
Yeah.
Because of my personal network and, the people that I know, but B, because they know the quality of work that we do as an agency. So I'd still say, a large percentage of our actual new client acquisition comes through referral, and that's largely to our network.
Perfect. Good. Thank you very much indeed, Dan, for being my guest and sharing your insights. It's been really insightful, great stuff for me, and I'm sure for our listeners too. If people would like to get hold of you or find out more about Wonderful, what's the best way for them to do that, Dan?
As is the word of the modern world, probably LinkedIn. There's not many Dan Maudhubs on LinkedIn. I think I'm probably the only one. I've not actually ever looked, but I'm probably the only one on LinkedIn. So yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn. Feel free to sort of, we do have a podcast as well called the Wonderful People Podcast. Feel free to subscribe to that as well. Subscribe to our newsletter. But yeah, just connect on LinkedIn. Would love to chat with other agency owners and agency types, because I think it's a very interesting space for him, dealing with so many different things. So yeah, always up for a conversation.
Super, fantastic. Dan, thank you very much indeed for being my guest on ScaleUp Radio.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if you're building and scaling your own business, you might well be interested in our book, The Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System. And it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a practical handbook around scaling a business in a structured way. And you can order a copy on all your favorite online retailers, including an audio version, or you can find it and other supporting resources on our website, www.esusgroup.co.uk. That's esusgroup.co.uk, which is esusgroup.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.